Dave Hollerith here. The World Economic Forum met in Davos last week. Now, this is a conference that brings the top business leaders across the world together in Davos, Switzerland to hear from economists, activists, celebrities, and the world's most powerful politicians. This year, the theme was Stakeholders for a Cohesive and Sustainable World. And along these lines, President Trump delivered a speech that could basically be summarized with this clip.
The American dream is back, bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. Years of economic stagnation have given way to a roaring geyser of opportunity. U.S. stock markets have soared by more than 50% since my election, adding more than $19 trillion to household wealth and boosting 401ks, pensions, and college savings accounts for millions of hardworking families.
Despite the fact that Trump has a track record for delivering hyperbolic and sometimes allegedly false statements and speeches, all of what he's saying is true. The U.S. economy is booming right now, and currently it's in its longest expansion period in history. But a lot of people wonder, doesn't that mean we're due for a downturn? That's pretty much a common moniker. Economic recessions happen, every 10 years. And if we're thinking back to the last economic recession in America, 2008 financial crisis, there's a pretty strong correlation to Bitcoin. Chancellor on brink of second bailouts for bank. That was the New York Times headline that Satoshi Nakamoto put as a note in Bitcoin's Genesis block. Now, people can argue around how much the 2008 financial crisis actually influenced Bitcoin's inception, since historically the idea of Bitcoin had been around for several decades. But there's no denying that the basis for Bitcoin's value hinges on the fact that it is sound money, meaning it cannot be manipulated by central banks. Also meaning it has enormous utility as a safe store of value during a financial crisis. So in light of that, for the next two episodes, I want to focus on another financial crisis that's happening right now. This one is very different. So, this is the national anthem of Lebanon, a country in the midst of a very unique political and economic crisis. Since October, citizens have been protesting in the streets, banks have placed restrictions and outright blocks on people trying to get their money out, and at the heart of these problems is what can best be described as political mismanagement and a good old-fashioned central bank Ponzi scheme. Connected to all this is the diaspora. These are Lebanese migrants and descendants who, for one reason or another, live in other parts of the world, but might still very well have family back in Lebanon. In total, there are approximately 4 million people living in Lebanon, while the Lebanese diaspora is ranged to be anywhere between 4 and 8 million worldwide. Yeah, it's big. Within the diaspora is a small contingent of educated and engaged people who are supporting those living in Lebanon by sharing information and offering solutions for how its economy could get back on track before things get even worse. They're mostly doing this through Twitter and other social media applications like Discord. Bitcoin, as well as a central bank-backed cryptocurrency, are two solutions currently being discussed. For the next two episodes, I have interviews with two members of the diaspora who currently live in the U.S. This episode mainly focuses on understanding the current Lebanese financial crisis in all its complex historical, political, and economic turmoil. My guest is Mike Azar, a financial consultant and lecturer who can walk us through how all this got started and what it might mean for the country's future.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, Dave. I mean, Lebanon is a small country, so it doesn't really get too much international press, but I think it's a very interesting case. And in the coming year, I think it's going to become, it's going to get on a lot of people's radar screen.
Well, yeah, so, just kind of starting with thinking about the protests.
The latest round of protests started in October, but things have been building up for many years. We've had basically zero economic growth for a few years now. Lebanon's kind of in an interesting case because we have a huge diaspora. People here, young people, they grow up with the expectation that they're going to emigrate to Europe or the US or Africa or Australia or Canada, because there's just no opportunities here. And at the same time, we have a very well-educated society. So we actually have millions more Lebanese living outside of Lebanon than living in Lebanon. And things have been gradually getting worse, really since 2011.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just happened so slowly that it took a while for things to get so bad that there was a spark that started this latest round. And the protests aren't, they're all over the country. That's what's kind of remarkable about it, is that typically you have protests that happen, mainly in the capital. Historically, you've had kind of a lot of mistrust between different communities in this country. But what's interesting about these protests is that they're economically driven. So people of different communities that have historically had mistrust for one another now realize that they actually have a lot in common, that the economic situation is affecting all of them the same. And so, you have massive protests in Beirut and the second largest city, Tripoli, in small towns, the mountains, really just all over. And that's why it seems to people here that this time is different. It's different than protests that have happened in the past that have been concentrated in either one community or another.
Mm-hmm.
The driving force of this has been something that all Lebanese are affected equally by,